I've been participating in LD jams for a couple of years now. My games so far were rather traditional, nothing surprising or original like so many other jam games that I played over the years. For LD39, I was looking to change that, to challenge myself, and to adhere to additional self-imposed rules. I attached those goals to my screen that they would always put me back on track should I stray too far. I wanted to be weird, to get out of my comfort zone, to use an uncommon setting, and to be unsellable. No more distractions, no more polishing, just writing a game. This is the post-mortem of my game, Power MT.
You unlock this door with a key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of polish. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of assets and code. You've just crossed over into the game dev zone.
Voting is always a glimpse into chaos. This time I suggested some themes of my own to tip the scales in my favor. Unsurprisingly, my themes didn't make the cut. While there were some very few workable suggestions, I found the majority of them plain stupid. But I've always hated the theme, so why should it be different this time around? The day before the announcement, I was struck with a migraine. Mercifully, 3 glasses of water, an aspirin and a nap were enough to rid myself of the affliction. I wasn't feeling splendid, but well enough for some game dev. Let's do this. Many times before, a Windows update had messed up my start. In anticipatory wisdom, I checked for updates manually. And surprisingly, there were none. Of course. There was some time left to 3 AM when the official announcement would take place. That meant I could work a little more on my LD38 documentary, literally to the last minute. The winning theme this time around was running out of power. And for the very first time in an LD jam.
Oh my god. It's not shit.
It's not shit! It's not shit!
This is workable. After a minute of traditional blackout, ideas began to flow. I started up Scully, my retro text editor, and wrote everything down and kept searching for the weird, the original, the hidden gem among the low-hanging fruit. I mean, electric power? That would be way too obvious. My ideas included a take on running out of political power, with the player assuming the role of a dictator shortly before a coup, or a more abstract and mathematical take on running out of powers on a number. After half an hour, I returned to good old Wikipedia for more inspirations and learned of the existence of a few towns named Power. The one in Montana tickled my fancy the most. Since we're living in
The future!
Google Street View made it possible to click myself along the dirt roads and virtually explore the town myself. It had this vibe of an ordinary place with a Stephen King-like horror lurking somewhere underneath. I took inspiration from Stranger Things and Slender, the 8 Pages. The player would be hunted by some shadowy beast. They just had to survive and eventually escape. You wouldn't play as a soldier or superhero, but yourself, only with the apps on your smartphone to your aid. I just loved it. I began assembling a list of all things you could use a cell phone for that would require battery power. Flashlight, compass, reception, the camera. In my previous jams, I had never arrived at a workable idea before being 12 hours in or more. But this time around, I had a great idea just after 2. I just needed to decide upon a genre. Action? Adventure? Platforming? Action-adventure platforming? After reading a little in bed about the history of Infocom, it was just so obvious all of a sudden. I would make it a text adventure. That way, I could maintain my momentum without slowing myself down with graphics to paint and polish. Because with only text, there's just nothing there to polish, right? I woke up in a much better mood than usual, despite some nightmare about horrific cyclopean cities that were inhabited by gigantic nameless things. Well. The weather outside was just so beautiful that staying inside seemed almost like a waste. But duty called. I had to make a game in a genre that was rather new to me. So how to start? Coffee. Always start with that. Isn't that right, Coffee?
You bet your ass!
The last time I attempted making a text adventure was over 20 years ago. Jesus. And a lot of things had changed since then. This day and age, I couldn't do it in BASIC again. The number one go-to for text adventures and interactive fiction nowadays is Twine. I have never tried it before. Learning a new engine or IDE during a game jam is one of the stupidest things one can do. Even I warn against it. Just do the stuff you know you can do best and focus on that. But I was so much ahead of my usual schedule that I felt I could justify it. Depending on your needs, Twine offers different story formats, from simple hypertext links to variables and flow control. I wanted something as close as possible to a full-fledged programming language. And the Sugar Cube 2 format allows for everything I wanted, even audio. Twine now up and running, my plan was to construct some kind of wireframe of the story first, to have a start and an ending, and then fill it all up with obstacles for the player to overcome and puzzles to solve. Perhaps even branching, provided there was time. Between beginning and end, I divvied up the game in different beats to structure the narrative and the player's journey from fleeing, exploring, gathering, observing, and finally fighting. I experimented and stumbled my way through writing the first paragraphs until I was low on coffee and inspiration again. To counter my usual case of cabin fever, I left for some public programming and coffee consumption. You know where to. Reinvigorated by a strong brew, I propped up my notebook and got back to work. Still, I didn't manage to get quite a handle on how to structure and maintain the story I was writing beat by beat. Aimlessly, I just cruised around Power, until it struck me what Tolkien once said.
Wisely, I started with a map.
And also Jim Sterling agrees.
I also think that I saw a map. Well, it helps to have a map.
Swiftly, I sketched out a crude map of Power. I selected a dwelling far northeast on Rainbow Avenue as the starting location. The showdown would happen on the football field on the opposite side. That now allowed me to plot the player's journey through the town and draw heavily on the real location. The Mountain View Co-op, this little trailer, the post office, the honey factory, the local bar, and the high school. Placing my notes inside twine, matching the geography, was all I needed to regain my motivation. Thanks to the internet, I was able to dig in the archives of local newspapers and chronicles, despite being thousands of miles away physically. Getting all the little details right was incredibly fun, and I just love my research. I learned of a nuclear missile silo not far off to the east, that the local pub, Suds and Grub, was allegedly haunted, and of the fire in the Smoot Honey Factory in 2013. That's all something that I could work into the backstory. Just as I was losing myself completely in my story world, the mall was about to close, and I had to leave. I still had some essential issues to solve though. The player wasn't given a clear goal or motivation, the cell phone mechanics were neither implemented nor properly developed, I had no idea for any puzzles, and overall, the atmosphere wasn't menacing enough because the writing could be better. Over these details and more I mulled as I made my way downtown. Once more, I arrived in my favorite cafe with my unsolved problems to work out a solution for. Maybe the mediocre latte would help me.
You bet your ass!
Long story short, I didn't solve any real roadblocks then and there. At least I was able to improve the writing and drafted the opening sequence to hopefully set the mood in the beginning properly. It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. I worked there until my ages-old notebook ran out of power 1 hour later. How fitting. On my drive home, I took inventory. I felt comfortable enough with twine to continue making my game with it. I knew the broad strokes of the story I wanted to tell, and I still had enough time to pull it all off. But it all was like on rails. No obstacles, no crossroads, no fun. In short, there just was no game, so to speak of, like so often before. And I had to face it. I was stuck. With the sun, my spirits sank also. I arrived to some healthy waffles Connie had prepared and left out for me. No sugar, no butter. A good helping of C-grade maple syrup made them even healthier. Okay, puzzles. Think. Puzzles that ideally make it necessary to use the phone in one way or another, and to provide the player with goals and mysteries through gameplay. Easy, right? Screw it, just finish the story first. I added node after node to the story, slowly making my way forward to the final showdown with some very simple stand-in puzzles. As I felt proficient enough with Sugar Cube, I implemented the boiled down phone mechanics at last. Something I should have done much sooner.
So whatever is essential to your game, but you've never done it before, my advice is to do it early and to just see if you can do it.
Oh, shut up. Instead of a couple of different apps, I settled for just flashlight and compass, because I couldn't think of anything else. As I was procrastinating a little, something dark and treacherous awoke inside of me. Something wholly unexpected and sinister. A demonic urge to polish, to make everything very precious. Around 2, I awoke from my frenzy of tweaking the game's CSS like a madman for almost 2 hours to make the text look just right. To calm down, I went over the beginning again, to clean and trim it down, and added a little hint to the threadbare puzzle in the phone call that happens at the post office. 3 AM, half time. Hey Phil, tell us how you're doing. From my personal schedule that I've only here in my head, I think there are 5 or 6 more hours I have to spend with just writing that stuff. I think a playthrough is barely possible. There's a lot of placeholder text, which sometimes is just one sentence. It's weird, it's out of my comfort zone. Since it's a text adventure, you can't sell it, and it really has some uncommon setting. Okay, I fetch now a glass of water and then try to plow through as far as I can towards the final ending puzzle. And when I have this done, I see what the clock says and how much I still can cut. But apart from that, I can just hope that it's not going to suck big time. Oh god. That night, I realized something interesting. You see, the thing with writing suspenseful horror fiction in the middle of the night all by yourself is you get easily startled. I'm sure that was nothing. There is a fine line between being a tad frightened by your own story and outright paranoia. What was that? At 4 in the morning, the convoluted branching of the post office dialogue was almost done. Still, at this point you could just walk inside without effort. I hit a stone, so players had at least to smash in a window first. The last thing that day was something bordering on polish again, namely keeping score of the correct actions players would perform, like in old Sierra Online games. At 5, I had enough for that day. There was still a lot of work to be done, but the radiant cities in my dreams called for me. That Sunday, the weather was pleasantly reflecting the mood I wanted in my game. Breezy and overcast. Marvelous. But first, I needed to catch up with my good friend, Coffee.
You bet your ass!
Sadly, the clouds dissipated and a cheerful sun killed off any mood for writing some dark thriller set in the blackest of nights. The best remedy against cheeriness is listening to Petri Alanko's Alan Wake soundtrack to transport yourself into a dangerous and haunted forest all alone. At 7 in the evening, the story thread caught up with the showdown at the school. I had a good understanding of the monster, but no idea how players should fight and kill it. I don't know why, but I wanted to chase the player up a tall building. The silhouette of a water tower against the sky is an image that I always associate with small-town Americana. To my knowledge, there's nothing like that in Power Montana, but I allowed myself that bit of creative liberty. Usually I would have clung to the facts without the guts to deviate. That was definitely out of my comfort zone. With everything else pretty much done, I started tackling and implementing the showdown, making it up as I went along. I needed to block players from triggering the ending prematurely and thus stranding them in an unwinnable state. I staged a Deus Ex Machina that would conveniently open a passage only when players had everything they needed for the final confrontation. At 9 it was time for a traditional game dev recharge. Pizza. When I returned to the water tower puzzle half an hour later, I was completely out of the loop. Gone were the variables I had been juggling in my head and what loose ends to tie up. Programming is almost as hard as writing. Tell us how you're doing, Phil.
I've just finished writing this whole text adventure thing. I just hope that I still have time to proofread all this shit here. How long is this? Oh my god, 5,500 words in there. I mean, some of this is control sequences, but yeah, probably a lot of people will think it's unfair. So sorry. I just wish I had a whole week for this thing. Oh, it's my usual problem. I've overscoped, but yeah. So the question is how to spend the rest of my time. Should I focus on making this whole cell phone interface nicer or at least bearable? Maybe I will dust off my old keyboard and make just some kind of music just to make the atmosphere real palpable.
Outside, the wind was rustling the leaves in every tree. Oh my god, it's just like in the game! Quick-witted, I placed my audio recorder on the windowsill to record the ambience to put in the game if there was time. Connie played the game for the first time and boy was it broken. The emoji didn't work at all. It wasn't clear what read as off on or toggle, so I went back to spelling it out. Then Connie kept dying at the post office, no matter how much battery power she conserved. It was never enough. My solution was placing a painfully arbitrary power bank in the post office, while drastically decreasing power consumption and start plays with a fairly charged battery. The game lacked some atmospheric bells and whistles, quite literally. I was running low on time, but for the game's sake I had to put in some music, any music at all. Due to the exposure to the Alan Wake soundtrack, I started with strings, but added more and more synthesizers with factory presets I intentionally misused, like playing them outside their intended range. For a creepy, brutal touch, I messed them up with aggressive distortion on the percussion and piano. I kept the piece with the strings for the beginning and the ending to ground the whole experience in familiarity before unleashing the synthscape. Thankfully, there weren't many melodic parts that required tweaking, and after 45 minutes I had 7 short pieces in the can. The actual implementation of the music took more time than anticipated, and in the course many questions arose about how Sugar Cube 2 handles music. This results in some choppy and erratic playback. But since the music is supposed to be layered anyway, it's not that distracting, I hope. If anyone asks, that's totally intentional. The clock struck 3 and heralded submission hour. I tested the game one last time and, sure enough, triggered a game-breaking bug. And God only knows how many typos I found. I had a sudden blue screen of death again, just before I could start working on the title card. You know you're properly screwed when you get another one upon logging in. Mercifully, I caught a break with the next attempt and could get busy in Photoshop. But what to depict for a game without graphics? My first and only idea was to cram in as many elements from the story as possible. I painted the classic American town sign with the game's title, tentacles of black fog framing the picture, illuminated only by a cone of a flashlight and a thunderstorm in the distance. The submission was a nightmare. Again, the servers constantly kept logging me off while I was sweating in the summer heat. The technical issues led to an additional super submission hour, which was further expanded yet another 30 minutes. It was truly infuriating copy-pasting the description and everything all over and over and over again, hoping for it to stick. It was 4:30 that Power MT was finally published at last. Power MT was my first serious attempt at a gamble, leaving my familiar workflow in the dust, challenging myself to go further. Now let's see how closely I stuck to my initial goals. Be weird. I failed in this regard. It's incredibly hard for me to come up with complete random stuff. My mind doesn't work like that at all. I award myself a score of 1 out of 10 for at least making up the water tower that didn't exist. Yes, that's already a bit weird to me. We should all be thankful that I wasn't at Nintendo when Shigeru Miyamoto pitched Super Mario Bros.
So, let me recap. You're playing a plumber that stomps on turtles to jump high enough to bump his head on floating bricks, out of which pops a mushroom, which lets him grow big so he doesn't instantly die when he touches a Goomba. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Getting out of my comfort zone. Developing a text adventure which I had never done in an engine I had never used before was absolutely uncomfortable for me. I say 8 out of 10 here. An uncommon setting. For that, no more than 5 stars. The setting of a rural town in Montana certainly was new to me. Apart from that, I set a bog standard persecution story there. Oh well, could have been worse. Be unsellable. When I proposed this constraint, I was thinking of the final game being so outrageous, no sane publisher would ever pick it up. In that regard, I failed. But the time of text adventures on desktops selling in the hundreds of thousands are over. God damn it! Let's say 3 out of 10, if I'm being lenient. Tally it all up and we're at 17 out of 40. So in total, I stuck to 42% of my goals. Maybe next time will be better. On a positive note though, and to my utter surprise, Power MT ranked first in the mood category even. So the time I put into making music was all well spent. I had a severe plot stopper bug in the final build thanks to a sloppily implemented switch statement. And I had to take out the emoji because they wouldn't play nice with all browsers. And apparently you can polish a text adventure's visuals. Just look at those evenly spaced containers and the paragraphs and the lines, and it's just neat. Even without fully reaching my self-imposed goals, I write it off as a success. But there was no time to rest on my laurels. For the upcoming LD40, I want to address the biggest shortcoming of all of my gem games so far. So stay tuned. Now only one question remains. Will the theme suck?
You bet your ass!